I'm Alex James, broadcaster and presenter, and 10 years ago, I had a front row seat for one of the biggest musical success stories of all time.
Simon kind of called me and he was like, just trust me, come meet the contestants. We've got a special group.
A whole decade has now passed since 5 boys entered the X Factor audition rooms.
Every generation sort of needs their own boy bands, and that was the right time for them to come up and sort of claim to be the definitive boy band of their moment.
These boys would become One Direction, and One Direction would quickly become the biggest band in the world.
It's the sheer volume of the crowd when the music stops and the lights lower before they come on is deafening, but in the best way.
The creation of 1D sparked a reaction unlike anything that's come before, and during my time on air, I interviewed the group many, many times. So now, 10 years on from the summer in which One Direction were formed, I wanted to celebrate the story of their incredible success, and it's here for you to celebrate with me.
But their story and their success was very much a partnership with the fans, and I think everything that they were doing at that time, it was kind of presented in a way that it was in tandem with the fans to feel like a kind of, it was a shared success and a shared experience.
This is 10 years of One Direction. Episode 5, Making the Memories. I wanted to use this last episode of 10 years of One Direction and leave the final word to the Directioners, who've been kind enough to be part of this series, speaking for the collective and representing fans all over the world. When people ask me about my job and I tell them some of the amazing people I've met and interviewed over the years, they always want to know more about what One Direction were like. Truth is, I genuinely enjoyed interviewing them, and it was exciting to see how they grew, both in fame and personally, and above all else, you never knew where each encounter was going to go and where it would end. One minute you were chatting about the new album, and the next you'd be chatting about Niall's new brace. In all honesty, sometimes interviewing pop stars and celebrities isn't easy. There's usually a whole load of other people in the room at the same time. Managers, hair and makeup artists, record label reps and pluggers. Some of the more serious amongst them might be obviously watching the clock hanging over your shoulder, making you incredibly conscious of the time. Above all else, it was pretty much down to me to have to keep control. So when you're interviewing 5 young lads, it was like what I imagine is conducting an orchestra. They were having fun, they were daft, they would muck about. And when they were all in an interview together, it could sometimes be like herding cats. And sometimes I'd feel like a school teacher, trying with all my being to not lose control. And the bigger the group became, the bigger the pressure to utilise every second spent with them and not let it fall apart. Prime example, I had limited time with them backstage at the Manchester Arena in 2012. And by this time, the band was so big that they each had individual members of their team to look after them. I don't think Louis was in the mood for interviews that day, and a bottle of water came flying through the air at one point. It was a mess. You can see this interview on YouTube. One Direction's success translated into the radio content that they were part of, and James Robinson was the producer on my show during most of the 1D madness.
It's like the biggest things from it are just like the numbers and stuff of how well things went when we were doing it. So I know like Facebook Live is kind of a normal thing that we do, or Instagram Live is kind of normal now. But when we tried it with some software that was embedded into a web page and we were getting like 11,000 people watching live, those kind of numbers back then were enormous. So it allowed us to try loads of things, and you'd have this instant surge of the fans who would throw themselves into it as well and try new stuff. I mean, the next time you did an interview with Ollie Murs, the same lot wouldn't be there, but it was a revolving door of 1D fans hopping from channel to channel, finding the boys, finding out what they're up to, trying to dig a little bit more about them. But it was interesting to be a tiny little piece of that as well.
And one of James's strongest memories of working with the boys?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because if you want to keep them happy because they're doing stuff for you and it's on your show and you're grateful for them to come back. Because at that point, on In Demand, we were doing it. They weren't necessarily going into every interview, but at the same time, when they were coming into the building and the studios that we were doing it at, I remember one interview where it was maybe they had 6 or 7 interviews to do, and I was overseeing a couple of them where they didn't have producers, and I walked past the studio back in to it at one point to find that Niall was using the camera that I'd set up to record the interview to zoom in on the presenter's bald patch, and that was the final straw for me. I was like, you know what? No, guys. And it was the day that you were going to go on live with Alex, and I was like, we're going to can this if you're going to be behaving like this. People have flown all over for a few minutes with you, and you're zooming on someone's patch. What are you doing? And I remember Dan, one of the other producers, high-fived me, and Claire, who looks after them, was like, you know what, fair play for doing that, because they needed it today. They've been particularly naughty, some of them. But yeah, there was always a how far can they push it? And it wasn't all of them, I must add. Some of them were more naughty than others, and I won't say who, but you can probably work it out.
Before the release of This Is Us, the movie in 2013, we were invited to London to see the movie and interview the boys. And that day they'd been split into two groups so they could get through as many interviews as possible. My interview was the last one of the day, and it was with Harry and Niall. And we were all doing our job very, very well. I had no idea, though, in the meantime, that in the room next door, Liam, Louis and Zayn had finished their interviews, and they decided to creep into the room I was in. And I had no clue that for about a minute, Liam was stood behind me with his trousers down, whilst Louis was larking about. In this moment, I remember also Zayn was pretty quiet in the corner. He said hello as we all left, and that was the last time that I saw him. And just a few months later, he left the group. Songwriter Savan Katedja had been close with the group during their early days.
I would say that towards the end, when I was seeing them somewhat often, or every few months, when I could, or when, I noticed that Zayn was. I noticed a change in him. He was a lot more introverted. Became a lot more introverted than he was in the past. Whether I thought something like that would happen, at the time I wasn't in contact with him so much. I wasn't aware how major the issues or how he was feeling at that point. But he did what's best for him. And I'm sure he had his reasons. It probably wasn't an easy decision to make, and it probably wasn't easy for the rest of the band, obviously, for him to make that decision. But giving him the benefit of the doubt, I assume he did it for reasons for his own health.
Inevitably, the fans had lots of questions and were confused at this point. Nitya is a directioner from India.
I was pretty upset with him for leaving the band. The main question that was in my head was, One Direction cannot be One Direction without Zayn. So are they going to change their name? Are they going to continue touring? What are they going to do? What is the future of the band? But, of course, then later I realized the reasons for Zayn leaving and why he had to do that. So I'm proud of him for being able to do that, actually. For being able to stand up for himself.
I think Margaret, a directioner from Australia, had the kind of reaction that was common for fans around the world.
I cried all day. I couldn't even get out of bed for school. Looking back at it was so funny the way I reacted. But at the time, obviously, I didn't think so. So I was at boarding school at the time, and the mistress, that's the lady that looks after us, she wakes us up in the morning and then again at 7:30 comes around to kick us out. And it was so funny because when she came back in the second time to kick us out, that was the exact moment I started reading the statement. So she came in right on time for my breakdown. I had just woken up. And my roommate had woken up maybe like a couple minutes before me, and she goes on her phone, and then the next thing I know, she's just crying, and I'm like, what's happening? The only thing she says is, he left, he's gone, and I just like, what's going on? I jump on my phone, and then I start reading the statement. And then I immediately start crying, and we're both just sobbing in our beds.
It's a tale as old as time. Robbie left Take That, Jerry left the Spice Girls, and in this case it was Zayn. The rest of 1D continued to tour and release music and achieve further critical and commercial success. Andrew Unterberger from Billboard magazine believes that One Direction ran their course for sure, but defied the odds when it came to what had come previously.
I think it was probably inevitable that One Direction would splinter or at least not kind of continue on at the same sort of level that they always were. I mean, it's very, very rare that boy bands last for more than 3 albums in the first place. By album 4, usually either a key member is left or music has sort of changed in the background, or they're just not performing at the same caliber that they used to be. I mean, if you go through the great boy bands of history, unless you're counting bands like the Beatles, it's pretty rare that you find a boy band that lasts more than 3 albums at a high level. And they did. They lasted for 5 albums, 5 albums in 5 years, which is a pretty crazy output by 21st century boy band standards. It's almost more like a 60s or an 80s sort of model. So I mean, they lasted 5 years, I guess, which is about the normal lifespan for a boy band. But they just packed so much into those 5 years that they left a pretty strong catalog of music compared to a lot of their peers and a lot of their predecessors.
So here we are in the crazy year that is 2020, 10 years on since One Direction began their journey of world domination. Harry, Niall and Louis would have been touring this year, and there's been plenty of rumours about possible reunions and how that might look. By the time you listen to this, it might have happened. We don't know. Is Zayn going to be part of it? What's going to happen next? Is there a secret TV project in the works, maybe? We wait with our fingers tightly crossed. I wanted to end this series with the people that matter most in this story, the fans. Throughout this podcast, you've heard what I think made One Direction so special. You've heard from people who've worked with the boys, but what is it really that makes them so magical? Here's Clara from Spain.
The way, not only because of their music, because of course I love their music, they made me feel so good with the music, but I think that they have been the soundtrack of my teenage years. They came in a moment that I was trying to figure out who I was. And they kind of helped me to get to that process. And, all my good moments, all my bad moments, they were the soundtrack of my life. And, I think that the way they are themselves, that kind of helps a lot, because they're not these kind of superstars that they don't care about their fans. They only care about the fame. They're so implicated with the fans, and also with so many charity causes, and important causes, LGBT causes, charities, and that's so important for me. So I think that the way they are and the way they treat fans is what made me stay.
There are memories that will never be forgotten. Jenna in the UK.
It was a very fast process, because obviously it was a book signing, but just to see them that close in the flesh for me was incredible. And then a few years later they did another book signing, and I was lucky enough to get tickets again. So we went, and it was a lot more relaxed. You're allowed photographs with them, so I have a couple of dodgy selfies. And I remember I was standing there, and Zayn was there at the time, and I didn't know what to say to him, so I just went, "I like your ring, Zayn." And I didn't like his ring. It was a skull. I didn't like it, but I just didn't know what to say to him. And then I asked Louis for a hug, because he's my favourite, and he gave me one. They were incredible memories as well.
Margaret in Australia will never forget the excitement of finally getting tickets to see them live.
As they matured and started taking more control over their songwriting and stuff, you can really see how much more depth was being added to each song. And depending on your interpretation of each song, obviously, it means a lot. And also their voices are all so angelic together and alone. I went to the Ocha show in Brisbane on the Road Again tour, and it's so hard for me to even comprehend how special it was being there. After supporting them for so long, the feeling of being there and seeing and hearing them perform some of my favorite songs live, songs that have helped me through such difficult times, just hearing them be performed live, it's so hard to even begin to describe how it feels.
Lizette in America even went viral when she showed her love for Harry's hair on social media.
So I pasted Harry Styles' face on Queen Elsa and put letters on the poster saying, "Let it grow." And before I even saw them in concert that year, I posted this on Twitter, and it got thousands of retweets and eventually made it into a online article from J14, like the top 10 funniest One Direction posters of all time or something. So that's my claim to fame. And at the concert, I know Liam was like cracking up over it, and then Harry saw it and blew me a kiss, and I'll always remember that. It's like crazy to even think that actually happened.
And for Eleanor from France, what the boys brought to fan life was so much more than just music.
It's a family thing. You know, when you fight with your brothers and sisters, but you like them so much, it's the same thing. We fight, but we love each other so much, and we have a common love for those 5 boys, and we just love each other at the end of the day.
One Direction. They did so much more than just make music. Final thought for now. Harry, Louis, Liam, Zayn and Niall, they all started this crazy adventure by auditioning for the X Factor as solo artists, a dream that they've now all been able to fulfill since they started their hiatus. They were never really meant to be a collective. They were never meant to be a group who changed the face of British pop music. They were never meant to become the biggest band in the world. But destiny, for them, came calling. I'd like to thank all the contributors to this podcast for taking the time to share their stories, and of course all the fans I've spoken to and connected with, especially considering the difficult circumstances through the first part of this year. Thank you for getting behind this. Thank you for listening. I'm eternally impressed by your devotion to the boys. Keep sharing your stories and your memories with me online at This Is Alex James. 10 unofficial years of One Direction is produced and presented by me, Alex James Atkinson.